one wants him in the games until he dies playing. Acknowledge.
Acknowledge. Master Control.
End of line.
The Atari Lynx was released just 2 months after the original Game Boy, boasting far superior hardware and boasting the world's first portable with a color screen. As far as the hardware went, it was far superior to anything at the time. The only weak point would have been the screen that sometimes was hard to see and washed out. Thankfully, due to McWill, we can rectify that with a new screen modification from McWill. This modification will deal with the Lynx Model I. Let's have a quick look at the screen that Atari released back in 1989. Again, it was the world's first portable with a true color screen. The Atari Lynx had a color palette of 4,096 colors, 16 viewable at a time. It also supported a backlight that the Game Boy did not even offer. But as you can see, trying to find a good, easy viewing angle with the backlight was difficult. Also, the screen resolution was probably less than the hardware could actually support. Okay, now that we saw what the Lynx looked like with its original screen, let's get into the actual modification. Here is my Lynx Model I. It's actually the second revision, I guess, of the Model I. I have one where the joystick's a little bit different, but it's still basically a Lynx I, other than some small differences with the joystick and things of that nature. You can see here the screen is kind of dirty, so this would be a good time to go in there and clean it once we take this apart. And opening it's a little bit simpler than on the Lynx II as far as getting to the screws. So this is just again a snapshot of what the screen looked like. Again, this is from 1989 for anyone who's not familiar with the Lynx or was not even born until after that time. The Lynx Model I, this version here, was released about 2 months after the Game Boy, which was only a black and white screen. And if you played Mario Brothers on that, you can see there was a lot of ghosting effects with that screen. The screen was not a very high quality. For coming out 2 months later, not only was the Lynx hardware far superior as far as hardware scaling and rotation and other effects, but it did have a full color backlit screen. The Game Boy did not even have a backlit screen at that time. Now, it does look washed out. There's a backlight knob on here. Depending on the angle, you could adjust it to make it a little bit better. But in all honesty, the screen was, for 1989 technology, was fine. TFT technology back then was still not in infancy. They were around, but in this screen size, there weren't very many of them out there. And again, for a handheld that released for $189, with a color screen and everything it had was still amazing. So the Sega Game Gear came out much after, and its hardware was based still on the Sega Master System, which I like. I love the Master System. But the screen was not much better, if at all. It was slightly higher resolution on the Game Gear because they had a TV tuner attachment, but it wasn't that much of a resolution improvement. But the screen I still don't feel was as good as what Atari had done. It was really a good screen for its time, but it's a no comparison to the screen we're going to put in from McWill. So here's just some documentation that he does give you. I made some notes on it just to make it a little bit simpler. First thing you want to make sure of is when you start this, make sure there's no cartridges in your unit or any batteries. When you start getting on this here, there's a few things you want to make sure of. First, we have to be very careful in removing the components. I marked here each device that has to be taken out. The power module is one section here. It's 4 solder points, and this is the whole module that lifts out. So it's a little bit easier as far as the Lynx II, which was each component had to be pulled out individually. So that's a little bit easier. This one section comes out nice and clean. Then we need to remove transistor right over here, Q9, and then a resistor R73 down here. These are completely removed. The next thing we need to do is R34. This has to come out, but we first need to take off this potentiometer knob to get to it. So there's one little screw. This will come right off, and then we can pull out the resistor R34. He says you could put in a 0 ohm resistor, but honestly, just put a solder blob here or a little wire to bridge it. That needs to be done for this one spot. And then the fuses for the backlight have to be removed from this end of the motherboard. Now this is the actual McWill screen, the back end where his computer chips are, and he shows the VGA connector and how you can connect it onto here. I'll do videos later when I add the VGA to my Lynx Model I, my Lynx Model II, and my Game Gear. None of my videos right now will have that because I have not decided to do that. I'm not sure how I want to do it. I definitely do not want to have these big connectors on the unit itself. So I'm coming up with some ideas. I know my friend Aaron did a really nice job with what he did on some of his Lynxes, but putting a really nice flat connector in. But I'm not quite sure how I want to do it yet, so I'm not going to cover the VGA connector in this video. Now here's the other page of his documentation. Now when you go back here and remove all these components, before you go any further, you have to make sure you're only getting 5 volts here. So you can plug in your batteries or go through external power, put a cartridge in it, and put a voltage meter on here on pin 1 for 5 volts and here for ground. If you get 5 volts, you're good to go. If you get anything above that, you want to stop and get that repaired. Now, my friend, again, Aaron, has a web store where he actually sells a replacement MOSFET and a power regulator that takes the 9 volts down to 5 volts. And my recommendation, honestly, is if you're doing this modification now, even if your machine is okay, you might want to just order that from him and get them replaced. They're not expensive, but if that power regulator blows and it pushes 9 volts to everything in here, it's going to fry not only the Lynx motherboard, but potentially the McWill screen. He's very adamant about this having 5 volts, not anything above it. It'll cook it. So if you haven't replaced your MOSFET, which is what basically when you press the power on button, that MOSFET supplies power to the unit. And then the power regulator simply takes that 9 volts from either the external power here or the batteries and brings it down to 5 volts. I would definitely recommend get the parts, do it now, save yourself a headache. It's not worth frying everything for a couple of bucks. But with that little thing out of the way, you can see here there's not a lot of work. It is more tedious for some of these parts. But you can see the ground wire from the power regulator comes to the back of the McWill screen to here, which is under a ribbon cable. But that's a zip socket. This pops right open, and you can put your ribbon cable out, solder, and put the ribbon cable back. Some people do it without doing that. I would recommend not ruining your screen, because if you get it the soldering iron too close to that wire and it melts it, your screen's pretty much going to be worthless. So just take a second, pop this open, pull it out, solder your wire here to here, and then you can put the cable back in safely and push this back down. It's not hard to do. Now, TP12 up here on the board requires 12 volts in his modification. I suppose you can go right from here to here, but I chose to go from my 5 volt VCC to the back of the McWill screen to the VCC point and back out to TP12. Just the way I wanted to do it. No other rhyme or reason other than that. The next thing is here on his back of his screen is a backlight, which has to come all the way down here to this point. We'll have pictures of more detail of that later. It'll come down to this point. Now, when I said it's a little bit easier, but also not so easy, when you remove the screen from the Lynx Model II, it's a zip socket similar to here. So the ribbon cable slides right out, and there's actual bigger solder points below it, which you could see in my other video for the Lynx II. Here, the ribbon cable is kind of glued onto these points. It's very fine. So you have to be very careful when you're putting your solder on. That's the hard part. The easier part is, unlike the Lynx II screen where one wire goes here, one wire goes here, one wire goes here, they generally go right to the exact points except for the 4th one. So what I did was I soldered my TPR on first onto pin 4. Then it was easy going from here right to pin 14. Here, right to pin 16. Here, right to pin 18. Here, right to 31. Here to 39. Or sorry, 36. I'm passing myself. 36. Then 39. Then 41. And then 58. And then when it's all done, double check your work. And then triple check your work. Better do it now than screwing something up and having a short and burning something out later. Now another thing, the one thing he does not include, he includes these screws to attach your screen. He does not include any type of washer. What he wants you to do is when you take out your old screen, you're going to cut some of the white plastic apart to get the spacing gap here in the screw hole. I decided to go to my hardware store and I got a couple of nylon washers that I used. That seemed to work fine for me. I didn't want to ruin the screen. I know the ribbon cable is pretty much going to be worthless, but the screen, the backlight and everything, I try to salvage because you never know if that can come in handy later on down the road. So it's not a lot of work. It just have to be very careful with your soldering iron and take your time, have room to work, and everything should go pretty straightforward and well. So now here's the back of the Lynx I. It's easier to get to your screws than the Lynx II, which is under a rubber hand grip, hidden. So just remove these 4 screws. Now the screws on this end and the screws on this end are different sizes, so just take note. One's longer than the other, that's all. So if it doesn't go in all the way, don't force it. You put the screws in the wrong spots when you go to put it back together. So here my screws are removed, and once that's done, it'll separate. Now, I just want to mention, make sure there's no batteries in here at this point, and make sure there's no game cartridges in here. Just pull them out, because if there's a cartridge in here, it's going to hold this on. And if there's batteries in here, this whole thing can actually pop up. This is actually only held on by the screws when it's closed. This whole thing can pop open on you. So you can see here, your power comes into here. We're going to be concentrating on here. This is the power regulator. This needs to be removed right here. Here is our Q9 has to be removed here. Our R73 has to be removed here. R34 is under here. This needs to be removed down here. And then all this section here we're going to work on to get these removed here as well. Let's just go to our next screen here. What do we have? So remember before, my screen was very dirty. This was a good chance. I came in and cleaned it really well. Just use a microfiber cloth. Don't use a paper towel. It's soft plastic. You will scratch it. So just take your time, clean it up nice. And you can see here the Lynx Model 1s were infamous for the paint peeling off. And you can see it's just kind of sprayed on. It's not colored plastic. Kind of cheesy. It was probably a cost-cutting measure. My Lynx has been pretty lucky. It kept most of the paint. But a lot of Lynxes didn't come up so well in that respect. Now there are two plastic washers here only on this side. There's none on this side. But just be careful, they will slide off. So just be careful when you take it apart, take pictures, and make sure you have all the components. Don't let anything fall and lose them. So again, just another shot of our board we're going to start working on. Some people replace this speaker with one from Best Electronics. It's supposed to sound better and be better. I'm totally fine with this. Again, some people may want to replace their capacitors at this point. Again, Aaron on his web store actually sells a kit with the capacitors, the MOSFET for the power, and the diode, which power regulates down to 5 volts. I think he charges like $9 for everything. It's worth it just to make sure your device here and the screen is all protected. And here is the other side of the Lynx Model 1. You can see here's your joystick port, your game cartridge, paper speaker, your buttons, your option buttons, your power buttons over here. Now here's the screen itself, and again, there's no socket for this power for the ribbon cable for the screen. It's actually glued on here and here. You have to be very careful. We'll talk about it in a minute how you get these off. These are just a rubber grommet. So this screen actually floats on these rubber grommets. If you just pull to the side, you can get the screen out and flip it over. So it's just very easy to pull them out. And these are not going to be used anymore anyway. And the only way I was able to get them out was basically pulling till they broke in half. So there's no way, I think, to salvage them. And to be honest, you don't really need them anymore. I really like taking pictures of the motherboard. So we're going to be getting started now on removing some of these components. Again, the first we're going to remove is the power module here. And there are 4 spots. There's 2 over here, 1 here, and here. This is your power, ground, and this then goes into the unit itself. So when we get to the other side of the screen, of the motherboard, you'll see where they're coming from to be removed. So again, here it is. You can see there's 1 pin, the ground, the power, and then your 2 other pin outs, 3 and 4 over here. They basically just used regular pins to put them in. It wasn't even on flat. It was kind of like at a 45-degree angle. Probably just thrown in quick and soldered on. But you can see here it's removed. Take your time. All these are very delicate. You don't want to pull on them. So give enough heat, but not too much heat. I know it's kind of funny to say that. But just take your time. If you have to, sometimes you can put a drop of new solder on there. It helps it bubble up and come out easier. You can use a solder sucker, a solder wick, or a just take your time with the I guess a solder wick, probably the best way to move these out, or solder bulb, I meant to say, to get these out. And then make sure they're nice and clean. Just take your time. Once this is removed, we next have to go to Q9, and you can see there's 4 little spots here you need to desolder. And once that's done, there's nothing goes back here. Just make sure when you do it that nothing got damaged or lifted. This is actually fine, it's just the solder on top. I cleaned it up later. I didn't take a picture of it, but this is all okay. Next we go above the screen, and you can see R73. Just put the soldering iron here, and the heat will transfer right across. This will just flick right off. And just make sure there's no bridge once that's done. I put a solder blob on here just because it's kind of what I do. But again, there is no short here. You definitely want to make sure that this is completely unbridged in any way, shape, or form. And so blobs are fine as long as they're not touching. Next we need to remove is R34 over here. Now to get to this, you need to remove the screw. There's a little drop of glue on here. That's fine. Just hold, put your hand on here on both sides and get a Phillips, turn it, it'll screw, unscrew real easy, and this will come off no problem. And you can see it only goes on one way, so you'll be able to put it back on again, no problem. Here's our R34, same thing. Touch your soldering iron here, it'll heat up and it'll come right off. But this does need to be bridged. You can either use just solder to bridge it or put a small wire in, which is what I ended up doing. So you can see here it is removed. Nice clean. And once that's done, not as clean, but it works. The wire I put on actually attached a lot more solder than I thought, and it just became too hard to try and remove it again. But you can see there's no bridge outside of it. The soldering here is fine, but there is no bridge here to the potentiometer over here. And once this is done, you have a good solder here, you can put the knob back on at that point. So again, this is the next section we're going to be working on, which is the screen and the backlight. Again, try not to damage it. The backlight itself is probably worth some money to someone who has a screen that wants to keep it stock and their backlight went bad. You can see here are the 4 rubber grommets that are holding on the screen in its current fashion. And then here is the fuse for the backlight itself. This we're going to be concentrating on later when we remove the fuse on one side. This is the actual backlight, and this is the fuse for the backlight. And here's the other side, backlight, then the fuse for the backlight, and the rubber grommets that will have to come out. There's the other side of the motherboard. This screw and this screw will have to be removed. That's holding on this plastic here, the reflective plastic for the backlight. And here you can see real easy the way that the Lynx I has its screen attached. It's kind of like if you've ever seen a Virtual Boy, how they attach there. It's like an adhesive glue that holds it on. They have some very strong double-sided tape under here and under here. When you go to remove this, I actually just hit it for a quick second with my heat gun, my desoldering heat gun, just to kind of heat up the glue, just to help it, but you don't have to. Just take your time. You want to pull top down here, top down. Don't rip straight across. You don't want to pull up these traces and make a mess. If you take your time, just slowly pulling down in this fashion, it should come off no problem without damaging any of your pins. This is the opposite. Here you're going to kind of pull up to get these here. Again, it'll be tough in this section and this section here because they put a very strong double-sided tape. But just, again, take your time with it. Don't rush. Just another quick picture of the whole board here. You can see when I pulled these rubber grommets to the sides, this just flips right out of the way. And this is kind of what he was talking about for making the rubber, making grommets for his new screen. You would cut this, cut this, cut this, cut this to use as washers to install his new screen. But I'll show you later. I used just some nylon washer that worked really well, and it didn't have to damage my my screen here. So just another close-up of this other cable. You can kind of see right here. There's like a very strong tape. That's okay. Just pull and pull gently up, very gently up. As you can see, these particular traces are soldered down. Just very, very carefully when you pull it. Take your time. Go very slow. Again, just another shot of the screen. It's not in bad shape. It's got a couple marks on it, but the screen does work. And you can see here again, that little piece of tape. It's very strong. Just take your time lifting it. You don't want to pull so hard that you kind of rip up. You will most likely rip every one of these up. You've got to take your time. And if you do have a heat gun or even a hair dryer, hit it for a quick second or two just to kind of loosen this up. Because these traces are just old. You have to be very careful. If you're doing this, I do want to say now this is being done at your risk. I'm showing you how to do it, but I take no responsibility if you do any damage to your Atari Lynx in doing this. If you take your time, you should be okay. But again, this equipment and hardware is over 30 years old, so you do have to take your time, and sometimes even still, you can have an issue. And again, here you can see all the traces here. There's an awful lot of them, but we're not going to be using all of them. We actually only solder onto, I believe, 8 of these for the new screen. We don't require all of these that the old screen required. So you can see now here it has been removed. So I just started right here, pulled up very gently on all these all the way across, and you can see it's all pulled out of the way. It's all done. Now it looks like here, if you look at it first, you might think, oh my God, I've damaged it. I pulled the traces up. You did not. This is, I believe, the flux that was put down on it, or adhesive glue, an electrical glue that was put down. If you actually touch a soldering iron to any one of these points, solder will flow straight across, and these are all actually fine. But again, take your time, and you can see again straight across this adhesive glue or double-sided tape they put down to hold this screen down in place. Just take your time when you pull it, and it'll come off just as cleanly as this. You can see I've also removed this one over here, double-sided tape, and just take your time, and it'll come up just fine. Again, the traces are all okay. I know it looks like they're not, but these are all perfectly fine. This is just some type of adhesive. Just touch a soldering iron to here, this solder would flow straight across. Again, everyone's here is good. No one's pulled, no one's lifted. Everyone is in good shape. Screen's removed, and you can kind of see some of that either electrical adhesive that's still on here. But this screen is good still. And here's the power regulator, and here's all the components we pulled out. So it's not a lot that needs to be taken out, but you do have to take your time. Next, we're going to concentrate on the backlight. Again, 2 screws need to be removed, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 need to be removed. Once you desolder those points, again, perfectly good backlight, still usable for somebody if they ever needed it. So we now have a nice open hole, which is kind of nice because when you put the wires in, there'll be a spot. There's plenty of room down here for your wires to go. I cut wires about 6 inches. The Lynx II I did about 8 inches. Here I did about 6 inches, and there's more than enough room down here for them to all sit down in and be out of the way. This was already here, so this was not me, just so you know. Must have been from manufacturing. I did not do damage to this particular unit here. So next thing, you just have to remove these guys and get them out of the way, and make sure all of your points are nice and clean and good. See, that was where the backlight went down, and this is actually where the old fuses are. So now when you flip the screen over, it's time to take care of the fuses. You can see fuse number 1, fuse number 2. So basically, that's what's 1, 2, 3, 4. Just desolder them, and then this guy and this guy will lift right out of the way. And they are now gone. So we've pretty much now removed everything we need to pull out, and now it's time to start putting things back in. So here's our new screen. I put a little flux down here just so I can put some solder blobs on here for my wires. And like I said in my last video for the Atari Lynx II, put something over the screen. I used post-it notes just in case some solder does drip up. You don't want to get it on your screen and destroy it. So here we have some nice solder blobs. Nice as far as I'm concerned anyway. They work. And here's the wire. Again, a lot of people use IDE cables or floppy cables. I didn't have any of that available. This is an old monitor cable I had. The Lynx II I actually used about an 8-inch. This time I used about a 6-inch wire here. And it was done a little bit differently, which you'll see again in a second. But again, only the very ends need just a very small amount cut off on it. You don't need a huge amount of wire cut off. You only risk getting a short if you do that. And we don't want to have any type of shorts. And we're going to be concentrating this particular cable onto here first, and then I'll bring them over to the screen itself, because this is going to be the hardest part. Unlike the Lynx II, you were soldering into something like this. You had a little more room to work with. This is very, very narrow. Again, just practice. If you're not good with soldering, it's something else. If you're experienced with soldering, you already know to take your time, and the solder will flow properly if you take your time and don't use too much of it. Okay, so since all the components are removed, you can see I have soldered on some wires. Now all the wires you see here right now are all going to the front of the McWill screen. We're not dealing with the back yet where the chips are. This is all the front where the actual LCD screen is, where I put on my solder blobs a moment ago. But you can see they're mostly straightforward. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. These were so close together I used one cable. He was far enough away where I decided to run a separate cable. Same with here. Now the way this works is, aside from the 4th pin on the McWill screen, these are all going to go right in order. So this here we're going to read off is pin 14, and then pin 16, pin 18, then we move over to pin 31, pin 36, pin 39, pin 41, pin 58, and this guy here is the TPR. So on the front of the McWill screen, you're going to go pin 1 to 1, pin 2 to 2, pin 3 to 3, pin 4 over here, then pin 5, pin 6, pin 7, pin 8, pin 9. So other than pin 4, they're going to go all in a row. So I recommend starting with the TPR and solder that on pin 4 on the McWill screen first, and then you can just go 1, 2, 3, blah, 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 all the way down the pipe and get the rest on there. This is the hardest part. I mean, once you have this done, the rest is almost like cake. Now you can see there's some type of goo on here that I put on some flux, just so I made sure that when I put some solder, I tinned these first with some solder, then I tinned the wires with some solder, and they were able to just stick that much better. But when you do put them on, you definitely want to double check and make sure there's absolutely no bridging of any of these pads. And you can see that they're not. They're actually pretty far away. Nice on there, fairly clean as far as I'm concerned. It's very delicate work to get these on here. It's very, very small wires and pads. But when you get them on, just make sure, again, there's no bridging, which we don't have any bridging in any of these wires. And the same over here with the TPR. It's a very small little trace. They have to get some solder on to pin the wire on. But once that's on, I would recommend, once it's all done, you've checked it and everything's good, I would put some hot glue on here just to make sure these pins do not come off, because I'll show you a little bit later. I had one little mishap where it got bumped, and actually one of these, I believe it was this guy, he pulled right off. I had to solder right onto one of these little guys on here. It still works, but it was all good. I didn't have a chance to put the glue on it yet, and it got bumped, and it actually did pull the pad up. Should be very, very careful. Again, so again, other than TPR and pin 4, these are all going to go straight across on the screen. So let's take a look at our next picture here. Here's our McWill screen. So here is pin 4, so he's TPR. So I would take this guy here, put him on pin 4 first, then once that's done, this guy's pin 1, that's 1, 2, 2, and so forth. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right across. So you want to go, let me go back here, I went too far back. You want to go pin 4 with the TPR, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right across. Now on here, there's no simple way. You got to start here. I took an X-Acto knife just so I can get a sharp point. I went pin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, soldered them on. 15, 16, soldered them. 17, 18, soldered them. When I counted all the way across here till I got to pin 31, soldered, then pin 36, 39, 41, then 58. And once they were all soldered onto here, I had this guy marked so I knew who was pin 1 on these guys, and I knew my loose wire here was my last one on pin 58, and this was soldered on first, so I knew that was my TPR. So once that's done, you would go right to here, and you'll do TPR. Then this is going to be pin 14, 16, 18, again TPR. Then you're going to go to pin 31, 36, 39, 41, 58. That part's very straightforward. And again, just double check your work. You want to come in, make sure your solders are all good, there's no bridges. And once that's done, and it looks something like this. This guy's coming all the way across, going to the end. He's going all the way up to pin 4. Then all the rest of these are straight runs to all the pins that are available. You're skipping 4 and going all the way across the rest. Once that's done, the hardest part of this is done. Just make sure, again, no bridges are here. Clean up the old flux if you've used that. Clean this all up. And the hardest part of the mod is technically done. The next part is we're going to be working now with the back of the McWill screen where the actual chips are. We need to get ground, VCC for 5 volts, and the backlight. So here is going to be our ground wire. Here is our 5 volts and our TPR. Now, these guys here I kind of kept together because, again, I ran these both to the back of the McWill screen to the VCC, and this is the ground. So when I go to our next screenshot, let's see if we can get a better picture of it here. Just another picture of the TPR. There's a little bit of a, almost like a Hershey Kiss solder blob up here. It's definitely not touching anything, if I can find it now. There it is. So it looks like it's close, but it's really not. It's actually up in the air, so it's really nowhere near that joint. You can see it a little here. It's nowhere near touching. So again, here's the screen kind of installed at this point. These are the screws he does supply, and I used a couple of nylon washers to hold this in place temporarily while I was working on it. But you can see my pin 1 over here, which is going to be, if I can find my directions here, pin 1 is our 5 volts. So the 5 volts and the TPR come on this one wire here that I twisted and put right onto VCC. And then this other is the ground wire, which came all the way across, and it goes under here. I recommend, again, it's a ZIF, flip this up. This cable will come right out, put on your solder the wire on, and put the cable back on. Your soldering iron heats this up, ruins the cable, your screen is pretty much done. So once this is done, your 5 volts, your what is this, TP12, is soldered to VCC, and 2 is to your ground, next to the backlight. And the backlight's going to go to pin 4 over here next to the large chip. And that's going to go over to, let's see, how about our next picture here, right down here. So next to your TPR, which is here, look for these 3 guys here, and in between these 2 large guys is going to be where your backlight's going to be. So this is going to go from here all the way up to your McWill screen to this point right here. And if you're not installing a VGA, this is going to be for your external VGA connector, which I have not done yet. You're pretty much done as far as the modification goes. So your backlight, your ground, which was pin 2 from the power module, your TP12 and 5 volts, both went to VCC over here. That's the majority of the work being done. So you can see right now here, I actually have some paper under here. It looks like it's touching. You don't want it to touch, to make sure there's nothing shorting out. And basically I did a little test just to make sure that everything was working here okay. There's still flux, as you can see on here, that's to be removed. This is not touched at all, so that cable is no longer used. So out of all these pins the old Lynx needed, we only needed these 9 total now for this new beautiful screen. And as you can see here, one funny thing was, when I was trying to test it, I forgot that the Lynx Model I has to have a cartridge installed for it to get power. So at first I was like, why is there no picture? Once I put a cartridge in and the batteries in, as you can see, a beautiful screen here from McWill. Now you can see, I'm sure right now, this is all got a nice silver border like the other screens he has. On the Lynx Model II, this is hidden very well. The Lynx Model I, you kind of see some of this. So I did a little something later I'll show you to kind of hide this to make it look less noticeable. But again, this test went well. All the wires are working properly. Now this here is from my camera. This does not look like this at all on the screen. Now looking at it here, this is black. And that's actually okay because the Lynx I screen kind of comes right across here. So it's actually a perfect fit as far as what he's using here. This is space that's just not being seen at all. And you can see little notches here. That's where the nylon screws are going to go through with my my little washers. Again, just another picture showing that it's working okay. Now, this is the washer I used right here. They had them in black and white. I got the white ones. But it's these guys right here. I'm not sure if your hardware store would carry something like that, but you could probably find them. And I found them to be very good versus going in and cutting up your old screen. Again, you can cut up your old screen, especially if it's broken. Be my guest. I decided to go this route. And you can see there's a good amount of space between them here. And I put 2 on. I got 4, so they're doubled up. So it's 2 per screw. And they're going to go into these holes right here. and into these notches. So you can see right here, I got the screws in. This gives a nice space. So all the wires very easily go under, tuck under, very nice, and there's a huge open space where the backlight used to be. So there's plenty of room for the wires to go down in and sit. Just tighten this down. Again, not super tight, because you might need to adjust it a little bit to sit properly inside the housing. But we got it on both sides. This screw was not tightened down yet. I tightened this one. I hadn't gotten to this one yet. But just make sure they sit in there nice. And when it is, it'll hover above this right here. Now, it's very important. Maybe put a little piece of tape here, and definitely on the top side, just to prevent any shorts from happening. You don't want to take a chance of anything touching and shorting out. You can see I did have put some tape up here, which is in its directions. You might want to put some down here as well, just to make sure nothing shorts out. Now you can see what I did here. It's all silver, and when I put the case together, I could kind of see this on the outside. I didn't want that, so I just took a Sharpie magic marker and literally just put some magic marker along this thing here. And now it looks gorgeous. It looks phenomenal. You can't see any silver on the sides in the housing of my Lynx, and it looks really, really good. Just another picture here. Again, when you put these in, you might have to do a little adjustment. You can see it's a little bit off. Just loosen the screws, position this where you need it to be, and then tighten the screws back down. Then you can basically put it back inside your housing, like so. Just take care when you're putting it back in. Make sure nothing's buckling, no wires are hitting badly or anything like that. And that's it. Your screws are here holding in your screen, and that's all your wiring. So that's really it. Again, I would recommend, if you're doing this, to do the MOSFET and the power regulator, and maybe even your caps if your machine's open now anyway. Here's all the components we removed: the old screen, the backlight, power module, the fuses for the power module. This one didn't come off too easily, he broke, and our little device, little resistors and transistors and so forth, and a couple screws. That's it. So before you button everything up, it's always best to do one final test. And here we can see we have a working Lynx I McWill screen. Let's take one last look at how the screen used to look before the new McWill screen was installed. And then of course, once you have it completely closed up, you want to do one final test, and you can see the quality of the screen, even with a camera shining a bright light on it, how clear and clean and sharp the new screen is. One last thing to note is the McWill screens do offer an external VGA screen mode. Now in these videos I did not install that option. Now when you do set up the McWill screen on the Lynx I, the backlight potentiometer rotates one way for the internal screen, then you rotate the other way for the external VGA. So if you do turn on your Lynx and you can hear the music, but you see nothing on the screen, most likely your potentiometer is turned all the way down. Simply turn the potentiometer all the way to the high mode and your screen will turn on. On the Lynx II, you would press the backlight button to switch the modes. And the Lynx I, rotating your potentiometer from low to high switches the modes. I hope you found this install tutorial helpful, and if so, please let me know with some comments down below. Again, thanks for watching, have a great day, and remember, game on.